Welcome to the itdvds.com YouTube channel. This is just a sample of the training available at itdvds.com. If you would like to see complete training, please go to itdvds.com. Now let's begin the sample. Hardware planning for Exchange 2010 completely depends on your particular environment. How many users are you going to have? Which normally translates into how many mailboxes you're going to have. How big are those mailboxes going to be? And also, how many emails do your users send out on average? All that information goes into your Exchange 2010 hardware planning. And Microsoft has some excellent tools that can help us with that hardware planning. We're going to take a look at those in a second. But first, I want to take a look at an example. And this example is just to give us a ballpark idea. It's not to be used for our particular Exchange environment. For that, we want to use the tools from Microsoft we're going to look at here in a second. So in this example, we've got 1,000 users, and we're going to have, which translates into about 1,000 mailboxes, and we're going to have two servers. The first server is going to have our mailbox server role, our client access server role, and our hub transport server role. The second server is going to be our edge transport server. Now for the first server, as far as processor goes, we're going to need a server with about 12 cores. And this may seem like a lot, but we're talking about a server that has 3 roles on it. And one thing to note about processors is they come in dual core, quad core, 6 core, 8 core, and 12 core. So if you do your analysis and you find out you need about 10 cores, well, you're not going to be able to get a server with 10 cores because they don't make a 10-core processor, and you can't mix and match. You can't buy a server that has 2 processors. One processor has 8 cores, and then the other one has 2 cores to make 10. Each processor has to have the same number of cores. So in that case, we would go with a 12-core server. And also another thing to note about processor is increasing the number of cores on your server a lot of times doesn't cost that much more, especially when you're talking about purchasing a server for your whole environment and also purchasing storage for your whole environment. And it can really go a long way into keeping your system performing smoothly and stable. The next thing is memory. About 24 gigs should handle this server just fine, and 24 gigs probably also sounds like a lot, but again, we're talking about 3 different roles. And your mailbox role by far is going to use the most memory because memory is used to cache the mailbox database. And if we cut it close on memory, we don't put that much in there, it's actually going to increase the I/O on our disk subsystem because we're not going to be able to cache as much of our mailbox database, so it's going to hit the disk. Now let's talk about our disks. About 12 1 terabyte SATA disks in a RAID 1+0 configuration should get the job done as far as I/O and storage capacity goes. And if you're not familiar with RAID 1+1 or RAID 1+0, you're basically going to lose half of your disks to redundancy. So in this situation, we're going to lose 6 disks to redundancy. So in theory, we'd have about 6 terabytes of usable space, but that's just in theory. In reality, you're actually going to have a little less than that. You're probably going to have about 5.5 terabytes of usable space because we lose some space to formatting and things like that. But, of course, this is just an example. In the real world, we might have another RAID set specifically for our transaction logs, and also another RAID set specifically for archiving. We're going to talk about archiving a lot in later movies. It's a great new feature with Exchange 2010. It's going to hopefully get users away from using PST files, and we can potentially create some cheaper, lower performing storage. Let's say we take 5 1 terabyte SATA disks and run them in a RAID 5 configuration. In a RAID 5 configuration, you're only going to lose 1 disk to your RAID, so you'll have, in theory, about 4 terabytes of usable space. In reality, you have a little less than that, but we can put the archive portion of the user's mailbox on that drive. And because it's archived, it'll be accessed less, it might have a lower SLA, and it's going to be cheaper because you're not losing half your disks to your RAID configuration. So that's our first server. Our second server is our edge transport server. Certainly takes a lot less resources than our first server. For this one, again, it's going to depend on what you're using it for. If you're doing some spam, processing or antivirus on it, that's going to increase your processor needs and your memory needs. But in this example, we're going to need about just 4 cores as far as processor is concerned. Memory about 6 gigs, so not too much. Remember, we need some memory for our OS to function. And about 4 146 gig SAS 10K drives in a RAID 1 plus 0 configuration should get the job done. That'll give us about 270 gigs of usable space, which should be fine for our edge transport server. And the SAS drives, they come in 10K and 15K, and that's the rotational speed. And 15K performs a little bit better than 10K, but the SAS drives are going to perform better than your SATA drives, but they just come in a lower storage capacity, which is going to be perfectly fine for our edge transport server. So there's our example, just to give us a ballpark. Now let's take a look at the tools from Microsoft. The first hardware planning tool is going to be the Exchange Profile Analyzer, and this tool is going to allow us to run it against our current environment, like Exchange 2003 or Exchange 2007. It's going to collect all of our current usage, and it's going to use that to help us plan our Exchange 2010 environment. So that's perfect. It gathers our current usage, and our current usage is what we want to use to help plan for future. The next tool is the Exchange 2010 Mailbox Server Role Requirements Calculator, and this tool is actually a big Excel spreadsheet where we plug in our information, and it can actually help us with storage planning, RAID configuration, LUNs, number of databases we're going to have, all of that. Not only is this good for planning, it's really good for documentation as well. The next one is good old Performance Monitor, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but we can actually run it, use it to collect data collector sets so we can gather information of our current usage, which we'll use to help us plan for Exchange 2010. And then also Exchange Load Generator. Let's say we've done our analysis, we purchased our hardware. Well, if we have the luxury of time, we can actually take that hardware, put it in a lab, and put Exchange on it in a completely isolated environment, and run the Exchange Load Generator on it to make sure that our analysis was correct. It'll put load on it, and we can see, oh God, it's actually choking. We need more processor or more memory, and we can probably buy it at that time, as opposed to putting it in production and then finding out that you don't have enough processor or memory. Also, it's great to find out when you will need more processor or memory, because you can keep pushing your new equipment until you find out when it chokes, and you might find out, okay, well, at 1,300 users, we got to look at getting some new hardware fast. So maybe when we get to 1,200 users, we start the process of getting new hardware. So let's take a look at how to download these tools. And we just go into Google, and we can just type in Exchange 2010 Profile Analyzer. And it'll take us right to it. And I'll go ahead and click on it. And it's just at Microsoft's download site. And there it is. We just click on it to download and install it. And again, this one we're going to run against our Exchange 2003 or Exchange 2007, our current environment. The next tool is our Exchange 2010 Mailbox Server Role Requirements Calculator. And we just click on the first link here and click on download. And I've already downloaded it. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. Let's take a look at it. So here it is. And what we're going to do is we're just going to put in our input factors for each of our roles. This is the role requirements input factors for our environment, for our whole environment. And down here we can see the input factors for our mailbox configuration. You can see there are a lot of different items that we can input, like total number of Tier 1 mailboxes. I put in 1,000. Projected mailbox growth percentage. How much are we going to grow? I've got it at 0%. Realistically, hopefully, we'd want to add some growth room. Mailbox size limit, average message size, personal archive mailbox size limit. So you can see there are a lot of factors that go into this, and also Tier 2 mailbox configuration. Once we input that, we can go to our other tabs, and it gives us information about how we should plan, like LUN requirements. And it even gets into high availability. If you're going to use database availability groups, how to plan for that, how to plan for backup. A lot of people accidentally forget, oh, we actually got to back this up. How much space do we need to, how much storage we need to purchase in order to successfully back up our Exchange? Log replication, storage details, our storage design. You can see it actually gives us a recommendation here for our database. Use a RAID 1.0 with 8 disks underneath it in this particular example. And for our log drive, use a 1.0 with 2 disks. And for our restore LUN, RAID 5 with 3 disks. So this is very, very helpful. And finally, the Exchange Load Generator 2010. We just type it in, click on it, and we can go ahead and download it. And all these tools are free.